In your assessment, and this may be premature, in your assessment, does SSA have an effective system to prevent overpayment and fraud within the two disability programs?
We haven't looked at it overall. There are certainly some things that we think they can do better. The data matching things that several of you have mentioned are things that we believe they should look at. They do certain matches now, for example, with a new hire database. I believe that's for SSI only. Certainly, why they don't do it for DI, I don't know, but that's actually an excellent database. It's information on payroll,
right.
So it gives you an indication. So that things like that they do utilize, at least for SSI, are good things. We haven't taken a comprehensive look, but I think that, with the backlog issues at the front end, it seems like the CDRs and some of the things they do have suffered a little bit from a resource perspective, which is
our fault.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm not going to blame you. I work for you.
Well, I already said I blame us, and
I'll let you say that.
Senator Levin has also noted that we've not funded it appropriately. Do you believe it would be difficult for SSA to use the Aero computer program to determine if individuals have returned to work?
I don't know if it would be difficult, but they've said that they're going to look at the feasibility of it, and I think it would be very useful for them to attempt to do that.
Well, that was, by the way, one of the recommendations you all made?
That was one of them, and they've agreed in the recommendations to look into that.
You all did make other recommendations. It's correct. Would you summarize those rather quickly? It's
really the Aero system, and then to periodically match data records at Social Security against federal payroll records. We asked them to look at the feasibility of both of those, and they've agreed to do both of those. I would say this, though, I think the other one that needs to be considered, we didn't make a recommendation, but the truck driver one, as you and I just talked about here, is certainly a population that is potentially a high return on investment population. So I think you may agree with me that that's something that they should probably consider.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if we're going to need to go to another round. If I had about maybe another minute and a half, I'd be fine.
Well, Senator Carper is gracious. He said, "Of course."
All right. So I have a question. I was watching CNBC this morning, and Commissioner Astrew stated that your study was hopelessly flawed. It has no useful data and has no actual recommendations for change. How do you respond to that? Have you ever heard anything like that? Anything GAO has ever put out before?
Not quite that clear, no.
Okay. Were those concerns raised to you
yes.
prior to today?
Absolutely.
In the same terms?
Probably in harsher terms.
Okay.
Yes.
Did you ask the Social Security Administration to comment on the methodology you all used?
Yes, we sent them methodology information in December of 2009.
Okay. And what was their response?
They never did respond until, I guess, the hopelessly flawed is probably the response.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Carper.
Just share with us, if you could, Mr. Coates. You're asked by Congress to do this analysis. GAO does the analysis. Come up with your findings and your recommendations. I presume when you engage with Social Security Administration, with the key people, that there's a meeting, a dialogue, a discussion to indicate to them what you've been asked to do. Is that the way it works?
That's correct. I mean, the initial step was we have an entrance conference, we have requests for the larger databases, and then when we pulled case studies from which we picked these 20, and those 20 are not representative again, they were aware of those, and so they knew who the 20 were quite a while ago, which is why I believe they've taken action on most of those 20. Mm-hmm. So at a staffing level, we had a pretty constructive, I think, dialogue with them. Right. They never denied us any access to the case files or the databases or anything.
All right. Going back to my experience in state government, we had a state auditor in Delaware, elected state auditor, and sometimes agency heads would feel that the state auditor, particularly as we got closer to his or her reelection, was interested in, I won't say gotcha investigations and reports, but sort of, you get the drift. And y'all aren't running for reelection over at GAO, so that's not a concern.
I wouldn't win if I was running the executive branch,
you might.
That's for sure.
Pretty good at this. But is there some feeling within Social Security Administration that GAO was on a gotcha-like mission?
No, I don't think so. I think that they put in money into their budget, for example, as I understand, to get additional authority or resources to do these CDRs and some of the other internal controls. So I think they themselves believe. I mean, it may be that they don't. I mean, I can't explain the rest of it, but I think constructively going forward, this can be useful to them certainly these case studies, I think, showed them that this arrow system could be used for more than increasing the disability payments, but actually to flag people that shouldn't be paid. So if anything comes from it, and I think the truck drivers, as Senator Coburn was saying, I mean, he's a doctor. He's seen this before. He apparently has signed many of those forms. Those two populations are very much mutually exclusive if you actually understand the DOT regulations.
The chairman was nice enough to mention the legislation that Dr. Coburn and I worked on for a number of years. It was a follow-on to 2002 legislation, which called on federal agencies to try to identify improper payments. Didn't call on all the federal agencies, but some. So let's get started. And the legislation that the president signed last month says not only do we want some federal agencies, we want all federal agencies to identify improper payments. We want them to stop making improper payments to the extent that they can, and then we want them to the extent we've improperly paid money, overpaid money, or there's money's been defrauded from the government, from the trust funds. We want you to go out and get that money. We're trying to create almost, I don't know what Dr. Coburn calls it, but I call it within federal government almost a culture of thrift. The idea that we have these huge deficits and we have to look under look in every nook and cranny under every rock to see what we can do better. Everything I do, I know I can do better. And I think that's true of all of us. And I would say the folks at Social Security shouldn't be defensive about this. Just use this as an opportunity to try to do better what they're already charged with doing. And to the extent that we can be helpful, one of the things I hope to come out of this hearing today was some constructive advice for us, what we can do on this side of the dais to be supportive. Let me ask, if I can, Mr. Coots, was it difficult or relatively easy to obtain access to the federal salary and other databases used for the auditor? Did your team experience difficulty in gaining access? Just a short answer.
No, probably the most reliable data in the federal government is payroll data.
Okay.
Quickest and most reliable,
Sure.
I would say yes.
Are there additional databases that your GAO audit team considered for comparison to federal disability payments or that you would recommend the Social Security Administration might consider for its oversight work?
Certainly, Medicare, Medicaid providers, for example, might be a population, or the CCR, the Central Contract Registry, which has government contractors. There's 500,000 or 600,000 of them. One would think that if you're a government contractor and you're the principal, that you may have gainful employment and income. So there are potentially a lot of databases. I think you and I have talked about this at other hearings before, the importance of data sharing in the government. We're one government, but we're 1,000 stovepipes. Yeah. And so you know as well as I do that there are a lot of potential out there that these agencies have that is not tapped, and really it's a matter of reaching out and getting data sharing agreements. It's too bad we have to do data sharing agreements, but that's kind of how it ends up working, as you know. Yeah.
Yesterday I chaired a hearing literally in this room on, it was a subcommittee of the Federal Financial Management, and we looked at a topic that's kind of similar to what we're talking about here today. OMB is pursuing some innovative ideas to try to reduce improper payments, including fraud. They're using modern information technology ideas, some very clever stuff. And for example, the White House recently announced an initiative to establish a nationwide do not pay list so that all agencies can check the status of potential contractors or individuals, and we applaud them for that. Also, Medicare will soon establish a demonstration program using cutting-edge fraud mapping tool that was pioneered by the Recovery, Accountability, and Transparency Board. It's relating to the stimulus program. Some of those ideas rely on access to private sector databases and to either corroborate data or to gain additional insights. Here's my question. Do you have any thoughts on private sector partnerships that might prove useful, including accessing commercially available databases to confirm the employment status of disability program recipients?
Well, the New Hire database, as I mentioned, that's not a private sector database, but there's private sector information feeding into that from employers across the country. That's one, that's a mother lode. I mean, that's something that if they have, I think they have access to that. That's something that has employment data, presumably for anyone getting a W-2 or pay, if the states properly fill that. So that certainly is something that is an important data, and there's probably others out there besides that.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you to answer that for the record, if you would.
Sure, that would be fine.
If you would, please. The last thing I want to ask, I've talked to people before, and my colleagues may have as well, and y'all may have too, who are on disability, who have the opportunity to go to work, but they're reluctant to go to work because they lose their disability payments. And in some cases, they think they deserve both. In other cases, they've said to me, well, it really works as a disincentive. I go to work and I lose all or most of my disability payments. And trying to think about human nature and how we think, any ideas on how we might want to modify the incentive so that when people go to work, eventually if they make enough money, they lose their disability payments. But there's a way to structure it so that human nature doesn't keep people on the sidelines not working, just continue to be dependent on the rest of us. I think we probably try to do that in the law. I don't know if we do it perfectly. But if you have some thoughts on that at this time, I'd welcome those.
Yeah, I think the Commissioner's going to talk about it. There's lots of work incentives out there. They encourage people to go back to work. They've got the trial work period where you can be paid for 9 to 12 months grace period. At the same time, you're getting your disability payments. So I believe there's some. Whether there's more out there that can be done, I'm not certainly an expert at that. But certainly we want to encourage our Americans with disabilities to work. I've done a lot of work with service-disabled veteran entrepreneurs, for example, and the contracting program for them. And so there's a lot of possibilities for us as a government to help people in those situations get employment gainfully, and those are entrepreneurs. They're good people.
Maybe I can follow up with our next panel on that. I just say to my colleagues, I don't know if you all have heard the old saying, without dreams there's no reason to work, without work there's no reason to dream. And you know, what we do, the work that we do is a big part of our lives. And like people say, well, what do you do? You know, meet somebody and say, what do you do? And if they're on disability, they may say that. But if a lot of people are very proud of the work that they want to be able to say, this is what I do. And part of what I hope comes out of this is a way we can incentivize more people to work, if they can, and to realize their dreams. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Along that line, Senator Carper, some people say that the unemployed can find work if they want to. And I come from a state with a 14% unemployment rate. And I've known of very, very few people who are not desperately looking for work who are unemployed.
I was pleased to hear that some of the folks are going back to work building cars, trucks and vans, and very good ones as well. Including a new announcement on one of the Chrysler plants reopening or expanding.
Indeed.
Good.
Sterling Heights, thank you. Let me just have a quick couple questions. We talked about working with database providers with the federal employees. Can you also work with the database providers to see if you could share the 62,000 names in the other piece of your effort with the Social Security Administration?
That would be the Department of Transportation, and actually there were 12 states, Senator, that we got that data from, so we'll have to work through that situation. But there were 12 large states.
And but you could do that?
We will look into that, yes.
Okay. And then, you know, Dr. Coburn raised a question which is, I think, troubling to all of us, and that's what the quoted response is of the Social Security Administration. And I always had thought that the GAO gave agencies an opportunity to comment on their findings, and that's a very important part of your process. So in terms just of the chronology here, so that we can go over that with the Social Security Administration when they testify, how much time did they have? Was that a reasonable length of time to respond, or was that just provided to them a few days ago, or how does that work?
They had two chances to respond. The first report went to them, and we actually met with them in March, and that was when they, I would say, disagreed is the understatement with everything. And we agreed to actually go to Baltimore, and we went to Baltimore. I went myself with several and met with them and went over each of these 20 cases and discussed the issues. And then we gave them a second chance to respond, and that was their formal written comments that went into our report. And then to the extent we had any disagreements, there weren't quite as many disagreements in that written letter as there were with the hopelessly flawed. That wasn't the term in the letter necessarily. But so I think that we took our best shot. We spent several months working through the issues, and at some cases at the end of the day, I stand behind those 20 cases. Those are slam dunks in my view. They may disagree with that, and I don't know what else we can do. I mean, I told you the evidence we had. We have people admitting to federal agents that they committed fraud. I'm not sure what more you need to prove a case.
Yeah. I think the issue is whether or not I will wait to hear from them, but whether or not there was an overstatement, and I think you were careful here to say you can't project from that.
No, and our report says that these are indicators. These are things for them to consider. As you've talked about in a constructive manner, should we look at a database of truck drivers who received their commercial driver's license after Social Security said that they were 100% disabled? That seems to me to be a reasonable thing for them to consider.
Is there do some states allow you to renew a driver's license without a test? And could it be that, I'm just speculating here, that some people may want to just keep their current driver's license kind of alive and current, so when they recover from their disability, they will have a license there? Is there something like that that could explain that?
Absolutely. You have to get one every 2 years. You have to pay a fee, You have to pay for a doctor to actually sign. I don't know, Dr. Cohen, what you charge for that, but there certainly is a charge to have that certification
In other words, you must in all the states have a doctor look at you.
every 2 years.
Every 2 years.
Every 2
It
years, so
can't be
that's-
that you just send some money and get a driver's
No.
license renewed without a physical exam.
You need a medical examination by a certified professional every 2 years.
In all the states.
Everyone.
Is that a federal requirement?
Yes, Senator, that's a federal requirement.
Very good. Thank you. Dr. Coburn?
You looked at 12 states, a commercial driver's license. Were those the 12 most populous? In other words, you're saying we can't extrapolate it, but I'm sitting here thinking 60,000 in 12 states. Were these the most populous states, and is that why the number's so high?
Some of the big ones, California, Florida, Texas, but not necessarily all the big ones. So they were ones that we knew. We'd worked with them before on other work we've done on
Right.
commercial drivers, so we had a relationship. They had good data, and they were able to get it to us. So it isn't necessarily the biggest, but some of the very biggest are in there. So it may represent
Yeah.
40 or 50%.
So we won't try to extrapolate it, but we may come back and ask you to look at that for all of them. You have worked with all the states before.
We've worked with many of the states, not all, but many.
Okay. Well, let me go back again. Having been a practicing physician who has filled out this form, and you've read the regulations,
Yes, I have.
and you both in Social Security and for commercial driver's licenses.
Correct. We've done work for Chairman Oberstar over on the
Right.
House on the transportation side, yes.
And the two, your statement was, if you're qualified to get a commercial driver's license, you're absolutely unqualified to receive Social Security disability.
I'm sure there's exceptions, but they seem to be mutually exclusive populations, yes.
And we're not talking about the time period where somebody's getting better, over the 9 months or 12 months, where they still get their payment. But if, in fact, you can pass this physical exam, there's nothing in the Social Security, both law or regulations, that would say you're accepted from that, to your knowledge.
Not to my knowledge, but these 62,000 all passed presumably one of these exams after Social Security said that they were fully disabled.
Yeah. Now, okay, now it's important that we note, this isn't Social Security's problem, necessarily.
Not necessarily, I agree.
Well, because what it means is either we have accurate exams or we have inaccurate exams. Social Security can't make that judgment, right?
No, and I mentioned, we found people that were driving that should have been receiving Social Security benefits, but they were a hazard to the road.
Right.
People blacking out, people, on
Yeah.
anti-seizure medication, people who were blind, who could not hear. Not that they shouldn't have a certain type of job, but 18-wheeler driving is not one of them.
Right, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Dr. Coburn, and Mr. Coots, thank you.
Thank you again, Senator.
You're excused, and we'll now call our second witness for this afternoon's hearing.